Peter Jackson's King Kong, the official game of the movie, might hold the title for one of the worst game titles of all time. Ironically though, it's also quite possibly one of the greatest movie tie-in games ever made. Developed by Ubisoft and released in 2005 on the PlayStation 2, Xbox, Gamecube, Xbox 360, and PC, King Kong promised a unique mix of first-person survival playing as Jack Driscoll and third-person action playing as the titular King Kong himself. I missed this game at launch and only recently picked it up. I knew it was well received at launch, particularly on the Xbox 360, but I was very curious to see how well the game would hold up almost 10 years later. It just so happened that the game held up better than it had any real right to. In fact, if someone asked me if I would recommend the game or the movie, I would have to recommend the game. I mean, all the actors lend their voices, so it's practically the same thing. So why the hell not? I'm not going to dwell on the story. If you have seen any of the 3 existing King Kong movies, you know exactly what to expect. A film crew goes to a mysterious island, Skull Island to be exact, and encounters some racial stereotypes, a bunch of dinosaurs, and a giant ape which happens to run away with the crew's favourite lady. Eventually, because people are bad, the ape is brought to New York where he's billed as the 8th wonder of the world, and all hell breaks loose. The game does diverge from the film a number of times, in the interest of padding out the length of the game, and you know, in this case, I'm fine with that. You spend 75% of the game playing as Jack Driscoll. These parts of the game play out more as first-person survival than the standard first-person shooter you might expect. Sure, you get to use guns in the game, but ammo is really few and far between, and aiming can be quite difficult. I can see this being something that annoys a lot of gamers, but I've personally felt it really added to the experience, especially since in the context of the story, Jack Driscoll is a film scriptwriter with no combat experience. Being a primitive island covered with dinosaurs, and with limited ammunition available, the game forces you to play a bit more with your tactics, and you'll find yourself spending a lot of time looking for skeletons to rip bones from to use as spears, or looking for giant insects to use as bait, or simply trying to make the dinosaurs attack each other as opposed to you. It's something that is largely unique to this game, and I wish it was implemented more in other games since. The bare bones combat also leads to some incredibly tense action sequences. Being pursued by a V-Rex with nothing to scare it off with other than some spears was quite exhilarating. These creatures are relentless and animated with an incredible amount of detail. The boom of their roar will get your heart pounding every time they rear their head, and they fail to disappoint. These creatures, along with many others, follow you everywhere as you explore Skull Island in all its glory. While the opening areas of the game can be quite dull visually, once you make your way into the forest of Skull Island, things improve drastically. Despite its age and some low resolution textures, King Kong can still look very pretty at times, even if the character models for the humans look incredibly dated. This is mainly due to some great lighting and plentiful foliage in the environments. It's especially notable when it's raining. I found myself constantly excited for what would come next while I was playing as Jack. It's a shame then that the other 25% of the game is spent as Kong. He feels just as big and heavy as a giant gorilla should, but unfortunately, for me at least, I found these to be the least interesting segments in the game. These fighting sequences felt more like awkward wrestling matches and didn't really require any thought or tactics to get through. They're rather bland and forgettable, which is a shame. But while I was playing through these parts of the game, I also couldn't really see how else you could design these segments. I think if a King Kong game was released that didn't let you play as Kong in some capacity, people would complain, so I can see why these parts are in there. I just wish they were a little bit more fleshed out and interesting. You simply mash buttons until Kong's rage mode is unlocked, and then mash buttons some more, and then finish the major enemies with a little QuickTime event. It's cinematic to be sure, but it's not particularly exciting to play. The final stage of the game as Kong on the loose in New York is especially bad and a massive letdown. Between a horrible camera and a complete lack of direction in what to do and where to go, it really ends the game on a sour note. Thankfully, I don't really have many other complaints about the game. I mean, it can be a little bit dark at times, making it hard to see, but at least you can turn that up in the settings, which I end up having to do about halfway through. I was also annoyed by the fact that when you light a spear on fire, it doesn't generate light. So unlike most games, like say the Elder Scrolls, where you light up a torch to be able to see where you're going, in King Kong you have a burning fire in front of you that has literally absolutely no impact on the environments around you, and helps you see about as much as putting a sheet over your head. Normally that would be a pretty minor complaint, but there are a lot of caves in this game, and thanks to some dark enemies, the lack of light caused some really cheap deaths. I'm going to put it down to the engine, as I'm not sure that the PS2 and Xbox versions that the Xbox 360 version was ported from could handle that sort of dynamic lighting, but it feels like an oversight all the same. There's also some light puzzle solving which I wish could have been expanded on a little more, but again, it's not a deal breaker and more of just a personal preference thing. So there you go, that's Peter Jackson's King Kong, the official game of the movie. Is it a perfect game? Not by any means. Is it a great game? It's really close. Despite some small, niggling issues, King Kong is a blast to play through, and in a lot of ways, feels fresher now than it did when it came out. Maybe it's because every other first-person game feels so similar now, or maybe it's just because the hype around it and the movie it's based on has died down so much. But I can quite easily recommend Peter Jackson's King Kong, the official game of the movie, to anyone who's looking for something a little bit more different. It's tense, it's pretty, and it might be one of the only good movie tie-in games ever made.